Hello, my name is Sherrod Halliburton, and I am President and CEO of Manatee Community Federal Credit Union. And I would like to welcome you to The Truth About Credit, where we explore a variety of different topics to help you understand credit. And ultimately, our goal is to demystify credit. And we're really excited. We have a guest with us today. We have Tamika Birch-Moore. Welcome, Tamika.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. We're excited about having Tamika. And Tamika, before the show, has kind of shared a few questions that she would like to have addressed. And we'll kind of try and tackle as many of those as possible. So Tamika, tell me, what is it that you don't understand about credit? What is it that gives you heartburn? What is it that you need to know about credit?
Well, there's several different questions that I have, but some of the questions were around the areas that impact credit, and I thought maybe you could kind of expound on what areas particularly impact my credit.
Okay, well, we're just going to dive right in. Okay. There are 5 areas that impact your credit. And what we mean by impact your credit, these are the areas that determine your credit score. The first one we all know about and we all fixate on, and that is payment history. So, of course, you want to make sure you pay all your bills as agreed, because 35% of your credit score is going to be defined by your payment history. Do you have any collections? Do you have any judgments? And do you pay your bills as agreed? Or do you pay them late, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? All of that is captured in the first category, payment history, and it's going to dictate 35% of your credit score. So that's the one area that most people talk about, but there are some other areas that have pretty significant impact on your credit. The second area with the most impact is capacity. And what we mean by capacity is how much of your revolving credit are you using at any given time. And what do I mean by revolving credit? What I mean by revolving credit is credit cards, lines of credit. These are accounts where you have X amount of access and you make payments based on how much of that access you used. And that's why it's called revolving. And your revolving capacity will impact 30% of your credit score. So that means that 30% of your credit score is going to be defined by how much of your available credit you use. The most obvious answer and the most obvious consideration is the least amount of your credit that you use, the higher your credit score is going to be for that particular category. So if you have $10,000 worth of credit card access and you are using $9,999, which a lot of people will do, that means you're maxed out. That means that out of your revolving credit, you have used almost 100% of it. That will guarantee that the 30% capacity portion of your score is going to be pushed down as low as it possibly can be, because that score is solely determined based on how much of your credit you use. Why is that a big deal? As a creditor, I like to know that you have some discipline. I like to know that if I give you a credit card for $1,000, you aren't going to go out and max it out tomorrow. The interesting thing about capacity is if you are discerning and you don't max out your credit cards, what will happen is the credit card issuer is going to send you an offer to increase the limit. So it's almost counterintuitive. The people who use their credit all the time and who keep their use of credit near the maximum, those individuals don't get a lot of offers for additional credit because they've demonstrated that they can't manage the credit that they have. So the best way to grow your capacity is to use that credit discerningly. The next area is credit mix. So creditors like to see if you have the ability to manage different types of credit. And what types of credit is there out there? There is installment debt. Installment debt could be a student loan. That means you have a debt that you make an equal payment to for a predetermined period of time. You have a student loan, you make a $100 payment for 36 months. That is an installment loan. You have a mortgage, you make a $800 payment for 30 years. That's an installment loan. You have an auto loan, you make a $350 payment for 72 months. That is an installment loan. It is single amount, predetermined period of time. The other type of loan, we talked about the revolving, that's with credit cards and lines of credit. There's also, we talked about mortgages, auto loans, revolving credit. The whole point is the more types of loans you have on your credit report, the more you are showing creditors your ability to manage those different types of loans. And that's going to impact 15% of your credit score.
So one question.
Yes.
So is it better to have one type versus more in one type than you have in the other, like more revolving than installment, or does it matter?
Well, you want to have a healthy mix.
Okay.
You don't want to have too much revolving. So you want to have a healthy mix between installment and revolving. You want to make sure you have both, but you don't want to utilize excessively the revolving. So even if you have 15 credit cards, the fact that you have 15 credit cards isn't a problem itself. It's how you use those 15 credit cards. So if you have 15 credit cards and you have maxed out the balance on most of those, then that's a problem. If you have 15 credit cards and 5 of them have 0 balances and the other 10 have very low balances, the fact that you have a lot of credit cards is a positive thing at that point in time. So how you use the credit will dictate whether it's positive or not.
Okay.
So it's not just have credit cards or not have credit cards. It's, are you maxing those credit cards? Are you keeping the balances at a manageable level? The other category is inquiries. And so 10% of your credit score is going to be determined by the number and frequency of inquiries. Now, one might ask themselves, why are inquiries even a big deal? I go out and I apply for credit. Why is that a big deal? As a creditor, if I see that you have 10 inquiries in the last 30 days, what do you think that tells me as a creditor? What would you think as a creditor?
Not disciplined well.
Not disciplined. That person is in search of credit.
Yep, chasing money.
Chasing money. Now, for someone who's chasing money, are you inclined to give that person more money if they appear to be desperate and chasing money all over town?
No.
Creditors are the same. So the credit scoring model is built in to negatively rate your credit score if you are applying for credit in too many different places. And in addition to that, creditors will see a lower credit score, but they will also see all these open inquiries,
Yeah.
and they don't know whether you got that credit or not. If you apply for a loan at my credit union within 30 to 60 days of applying for a whole bunch of other credit, I don't know if those creditors said yes or not. So me saying yes could over-obligate you.
Yeah.
So by applying for credit in so many different places, so limited amount of time, you put the new creditor in a position to where they want to hold on and not issue credit because they don't know if you've been issued credit by the other institutions. Because whether you have credit with the other institutions will impact your credit worthiness at the new institution. So do not go out and apply for credit indiscriminately. Now, there are some provisions made when someone is applying for a car loan, because generally speaking, you apply for a car loan, you might go to multiple dealerships and/or those dealerships might send your credit information to multiple finance companies. So the scoring models are kind of built to take into consideration auto shopping.
Okay.
that's primarily the only area where you're going to get a pass on applying for credit at a lot of different places. So you need to be clear whether someone is going to pull your credit or not. And Tamika, and the fifth item that's going to impact your credit is the length of credit history. And that's going to impact 10% of your credit score. And that's exactly how it sounds. That particular item is going to be determined based on the average length of all of the accounts that you have. So it's very important that if you opened up credit cards a long time ago and you don't use them very frequently, well, there's some value in keeping those credit cards open and on your credit report. You may have heard someone tell you, don't close old credit cards. Well, they told you that because those older credit cards will help to lengthen the length of your credit history. If you have a credit card and you've had it for 20 years and you have a whole bunch of accounts that you opened up a year ago or 2 years ago, well, that fact that you have that credit card for 20 years is going to lengthen your overall credit history. The longer your credit history is, the more positive impact on your credit score. So 10% of your credit score is going to be impacted by length. If you've had credit and you've managed it for a very long time, you're going to do pretty well in that category. If you are a new person, new to credit, then you're going to rate very low in that area. Or if you're a person who has had all of their accounts closed out and they're opening up new accounts, the length of their credit is going to be a short period of time, and that's going to negatively impact the score. So credit does have nuances, and it's very important to understand and know your credit and know what you need to do to improve your credit.
So some of the other things that I wanted to know as far as how credit affects my life when I'm trying to apply for mortgages or maybe in relationships or just going forward, investing, my profile, what I look like. How does credit affect my life in other areas of my life? What does that look like?
Well, I mean, credit is going to, and we talked about this on a previous show, credit is going to dictate your ability to gain access to housing. Can you secure a mortgage and at what rate? If you have poor credit and you can secure a mortgage, it will be at a higher interest rate, which would mean that you couldn't afford as much house. So you do qualify, but you have to pay, instead of market rate, maybe you have to pay a percentage higher or 2% higher. What that would mean is that perhaps you can't afford the $300,000 house that you were looking at. Maybe because your interest rate has to be higher because your credit score is lower, maybe instead of that $350,000 house that you want, you only qualify for the $250,000 house. Or let's go one step further, maybe you don't qualify at all. So having a solid credit score will dictate whether you qualify for a mortgage, and it will dictate at what interest rate you qualify for that mortgage at. So a number of different things could happen. You could either end up paying more than you want or end up getting less house than you're comfortable with. But that's how credit is going to impact your ability to secure housing.
Yeah, so I had another question too. It also affects like how you, for instance, your FPL bill.
Yes.
You know, if your credit score is poor, then you have to pay certain deposits. Is that correct? I mean,
yes. And audience, FPL, we are in Florida, so that's Florida Power and Light. And some of you may experienced, as you're applying for a utility, you're moving into an apartment, you're moving into a new home. As you apply for utilities, if you have very good credit, some instances, there are no requirements for down payments on utilities. I don't recall having paid any money on deposits for utilities because I have a pretty solid credit score. Now, for the individual who doesn't, the utility company is going to determine, based on your credit score, what your deposit needs to be. So if you're someone who has terrible credit, it could be that you will be required to make a sizable deposit. Now I ask you a question. Why would the utility company, in this instance, Florida Power and Light, require you to make a large deposit?
So that if you default, they'll be able to use those funds to then pay the bill that you left outstanding.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so when you don't pay your bills as agreed, there is always additional costs that you're going to incur.
Sure.
And that is because the creditor wants to protect themselves against default. It's no different than in your personal life. If you have a family member that you've loaned money to and they don't pay that money back, you're going to be very cautious about whether you loan them money again. If you loan them money again, it's going to be under certain conditions, or you're going to outright say no. Real credit is no different than that. Either you're going to qualify with very tight stipulations, a down payment, a deposit, or you're not going to qualify at all if you have poor credit.
And the last thing I was going to bring up too is that the credit, depending on whether you have good credit or bad credit, also depends on the type of employment, right? Am I correct in that? The type of employment that you can get, or the type of groups that you can be associated with. So do you have any thoughts on how that affects that part of our lives?
Yes, well, it depends. For instance, there are some employment opportunities in which the creditor is going to check your credit. If you want to get in banking, a lot of financial institutions are going to require that you have solid credit. I worked for the credit bureau. Before I was hired, they checked my credit. That was a job that they looked at your personal finances and your personal credit, and they made a determination as to whether you were even eligible to continue with the application process. So there's certain jobs and certain careers where your personal finances are very, very important. You do not want to hire someone with personal finance issues and they're managing money. Sometimes the threat is too, the temptation is too great when someone needs money and they work in a capacity where they gain access to money. So the entity hiring might require that that person has solid credit and that person has solid finances before offering. So you always want to make sure that you have a solid credit score because you do not want doors to close. I doubt very seriously that creditors are going to, that potential employers are going to say no because you have good credit, but some will say no because you have poor credit. All right.
Good to know. Good to know. So are there any debunking myths that you know about credit? Anything that you can kind of expound on?
Well, one of the things that people always talk about with credit is that pulling their own credit is going to lower their credit score. Pulling your own credit is not going to lower your credit score. Pulling your own credit is what we call a soft pull. That's when you reach out to the credit reporting agencies, and there are 3 of them, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. If you reach out to any of those credit reporting agencies and pull a copy of your credit report, it will not show up on your credit report as a hard inquiry, and it will not negatively impact your credit score. Now, if you go to a retailer and apply for credit, if you go to a department store, if you go online and apply for a credit card, those are what's called hard pulls, and those will show up on your credit report. And so, Tamika, I enjoyed our conversation, and we're going to wrap up our episode for today. I'd like to thank you for joining me today on The Truth About Credit, where we understand that it's not how much money you have, it's how much money you have access to, and we're going to show you how to grow your access. Thank you again, and look for us in the not too distant future coming back to you with more credit information. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.